I'd like to talk today about performance excellence and entrepreneurship. And starting a new business, this is important to me. But also, there's kind of a perception of entrepreneurs as being pretty far from the principles and the criteria of performance excellence and models and standards and things. And actually, what I'd like to hopefully disprove today is that that's not true, that they're actually very similar in what they do. And so hopefully you'll see that as we go through. So I'm going to start by talking about my background very briefly, where I'm coming from so you understand where these comments are coming from, and then why entrepreneurship. And there's actually two reasons. One, I just mentioned the difference between entrepreneurship and performance excellence, but also there's a very important reason why we need entrepreneurs today in our world, in our society, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll hopefully bring it into a smooth landing at the end, tying it all together. Okay. My background, 25 years in corporate America, started with Texas Instruments, then with Siemens, large, huge, giant global companies, and then a smaller company, Epic Technologies. I was, as well as many of my colleagues, we were unlike Elvis, where we actually stayed in that building. We got 3 careers as 3 different owners. In Johnson City, if you've ever driven south on 26 from Kingsport toward Asheville, if you look up to the right as you exit Johnson City, you'll see this plant. It's a big, beautiful plant. About 1/3 square feet, sits on 106 acres at the base of Buffalo Mountain. It's a beautiful setting. It was a great place to work. This was an actual unretouched photograph. I sent one of my coworkers out right after the rain. Said, "You got to get a picture of this." We were in marketing at the time. "You got to get a picture of this." And there were actually 2 rainbows. And she had brand new shoes on, and she wouldn't walk in the grass to get them wet, to get back far enough to get the second rainbow. But we used this in our marketing. We, tongue-in-cheek, used to say, "You want to do business with Siemens because God wants you to." During the transition from Siemens to Epic, we knew what could happen to employees and businesses. A friend of mine came to me and said, "Hey, I've got this idea for a product that I'd kind of like to take to market, and I'm wondering if you'd be interested." So we worked in the background. We worked on the side with this product. And the first year with Epic was good. And the second year, they started to move jobs to Mexico. So my plan B, that backup plan, became plan A in 2007, late 2007. And that's where Edamar comes in. So I went from 1/3 square feet to this barn out in Carter County, Tennessee. But before you get too excited, it's really not the whole barn. It's just that part of the barn. It's not much bigger than this room, actually, the part we're using. We do have some warehousing and some packing and shipping and other parts. And I have an office at home where I do my office work. But all our production, we do produce our own product. And I brought samples today. We do it right there, right? One of our goals is, because of what we experienced, one of our goals is to try and create jobs. We can do that in our own business, and we can also do that by the suppliers we choose. So over 80% of our materials, our raw materials that go into our product, come from within 100 miles of our operation. So we're helping other companies create jobs as well. And this is the product. We call it a KitBook. It's a combination of a science kit and a textbook. I'll have a couple up here if you want to see them afterwards. We make 2 versions, really. We make the standard version. This happens to be a teacher's edition. And it's just like a book, and it's just like a kit, and it's all in one unit. Teachers love it, students love it. We make a custom version that companies and utilities use. They brand it. They'll put their logo on there. They'll put a couple of pages in there about careers in their industry, et cetera, and they use it in their community outreach and their school partnerships. We've got great results from a study that UT did for us, and I have to put in a big plug for the University of Tennessee Center for Industrial Services, UTCIS. There are some UTCIS people here at the conference. They actually funded that study and did a great job. We owe a great debt of gratitude to them for helping us And if you're a manufacturer, the Center for Industrial Services is here to help you. So I would reach out to them. What we found is we got an education professor to go into schools in Knoxville, 50 students using KitBooks, 50 students learning the traditional way. This is our first title, Electric Circuits. And the students using the KitBooks scored 32% higher than the other kids. So we know they're effective. We're winning awards. We're in 40 states now, 5 countries. So we're getting this empirical data. We're getting feedback from our customers that they just love it. So what we're finding is the concept works. And now we're in the point of expanding production, coming up with more titles. And we just love our customers, and they love us. My favorite is down here, Sister Mary Margaret. She's a principal at St. James School out in Torrance, California, and she called to say, our students just love KitBooks. Do you have any more titles coming out? I said, because the best part was their test scores went way up. So they love them, and they're getting better test scores. We couldn't ask for anything more than that. Okay, let's change gears a little bit, and let's talk about going to market. And if you have studied quality, the quality movement at all, the earliest recorded history of quality activities was actually in ancient China and then ancient Egypt. And then beyond that, we went into the village marketplace, where people brought their wares to trade, right? I'll come to town on Friday and we're going to trade. We still have some farmers markets like that, right? And then there was the rise of craftsmanship. If you think of Paul Revere, he was actually one of the first who did branding. So people knew that they were getting actually his work, right? And we're going to talk more about branding. And then with the industrial age, we had standardization, interchangeable parts, those concepts. Then around the turn of the century, we had the Taylor system, centralized work, centralized inspection. We had Ford and his assembly line models. And then into the 20s with SPC, Schuhart, the work at what was Bell Labs back then. And then Deming and Duran. And then the Japanese quality revolution, which has kind of taken a back step here lately with Toyota. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It was very interesting to hear those comments at lunch today. I do want to talk a little bit about that later. And now we have performance excellence, right? And this whole idea of constructive capitalism is emerging as well, as opposed to the destructive capitalism that we've had, tearing down rainforests and using up all our resources and polluting our skies. We're trying to be more green. And through all this, now we've come back. We're back to the village marketplace with the internet. And think about what Amazon and what PayPal and some of those have done for us. Now we have the ability to go in there and rank what we bought, right? So many stars. And we can make a comment. We can put in our review of that book or that music. And so these modern tools have brought us back to the village marketplace, where the reputation of that person is very important. Make sense? We've come full circle. So as a marketer, as someone who is trying to get noticed in the market, this is very important for us to know how the market is working. The world is online. It's mobily online now, right, with wireless. It's a flat world. There's a long tail. If you've not read the book, Long Tail is very fascinating. Authenticity and trust and transparency are key elements. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then all those green initiatives. And the concept of and versus or. And the idea is that the or is what we learned in business school in the 60s and 70s. And I wasn't in business school back then. I'm old, but I'm not that old. But what others learned back then was, I'm going to get mine at the expense of you getting yours. That's the or. And today, there's more of an abundance mentality, and it's an and. I'm going to get mine, and you're going to get yours. There's enough to go around. And in fact, we may collaborate. We may help each other get yours. I help you, you help me. So we live in the land of and versus the land of or now. And relationships are key. And it's all the relationships. It's your relationship with your employees, with your suppliers, with your customers, with your communities, all your stakeholders. We can do a whole day on relationships and the importance thereof. Okay? There also used to be this concept of knowledge is power. And anybody ever heard that knowledge is power? And what that led to was sort of a hoarding of knowledge, you know. And I really think in the social industrial concept, what they really meant was, I'm going to be successful if I have the knowledge. And if I have more knowledge than you in the land of or, either you get it or I get it, I'm going to keep this knowledge so I can succeed. Today we know this is not true. This doesn't work. And the reason we know that pure, just knowledge equals success is because if it was true, librarians and Alex Trebek would be running the world, right? They would be in charge. They're not. So there must be something else. In my 2 years or so experience as an entrepreneur and 25 years before that, what I've seen is, and this is a model in work, so don't quote me on this. In examiner terminology, this is the beginning stages of development, not even deployment yet. But success starts with the application of resources to your knowledge, to your plan, to your people, and then the combination of your actions over time, plus some element of timing. You have to be in the right place, in the right time, in the right niche, and some element of faith. And that's me personally. There's got to be some component of faith involved. All right. There was also this notion that he who dies with the most toys wins. Anybody ever hear that one? I had a sweatshirt, actually, that said I got on a ski trip. He who dies with the most toys. I thought that was really funny, right? But we learned in the 90s, and even in this decade recently, that led to bad decisions. Starting back with Enron and WorldCom, and even last year with Bernie Madoff and some of the things that are going on, because we're greedy and we're collecting, and it's just not working. And the world is turning away from that thinking and more to he who lives with the most significant goals wins. And the reason that's important is because of the way we are now coming out of this recession. Actually, we're probably still in the recession, but as we're weathering through, we have a different decision-making mindset on who we spend our money with. What brands do we align with? And we tend to align more with somebody with more virtuous goals. Now, I'm not saying we don't want to be number one, and I'm not trying to be Pollyanna here, because I think this picture tells it all. Who do you think came in second place in this race? That's Danica Patrick, the darling of the race world. If you know anything about racing, you know Danica mania all the time, right? This was her first victory in a major race. It was in Japan a couple of years ago. And this is Helio Castroneves. He's won 3 Indy 500s. He's a great race driver. He came in second. And if you look at any sort of sports especially, and in the Olympics right now, if you look at the difference in reward from first to second place, it's usually about a 40% drop. It's true in golf. It's true in motor racing. Those are two easy ones to find. It's not winner take all, but it's winner takes a big amount. And what I find interesting now with the Olympics, if you listen to the announcers, and I'm like our speaker at lunch. I'm addicted. You know, you go home and watch the Olympics every night. And they'll talk, and so-and-so's coming down the hill. And they finish a distant 8th. And at the end of the competition, they'll show you the times. And they're like 1.2 seconds. And they're in a distant 8th. And you calculate the percentage there. It's a % or 2 difference in performance. But they're 8th in the world. They're not even thought of. Beyond 3... you don't get any recognition at all. And you see the difference between 3 and 4 sometimes. It's tiny. Does anybody know how long it takes to blink your eye? About 0.3 of a second. And some of those races, like those bobsled races, 0.3 separates the top three. If they were all going down side by side, they would all finish within a blink of a second of each other. So what happens? The one that gets the gold gets all the glory, right? And it's just that much little better performance than the second and third place. So it's important to go for the best, not at the expense of the others, but to be the best in your field, right? That's the point. All right, so this new village marketplace, this online world where reputation is important, there are new consumption patterns. There was a flight to Walmart. It's sort of easing back now. And what we're seeing is people are more concerned about value and not just about price. You might even think about your own situations as a consumer. All right? And we're using these online tools to help us make these decisions. Who are we going to spend what little money we have left? Who are we going to spend it with? What brands are we going to align ourselves with? There's some identity there that we need to manage. And if you think of brands as a promise, you know, a lot of times when we think of brands, what do we think of? We think of the logo, the Nike swoosh, or the Apple with the little bite for Apple computers. That's the logo. Sometimes gets confused with the brand. But really, brand is the promise. And the product is a proof of delivery of that promise. So this here is actually some chocolates we got the holidays last year. And it's a box of truffles. And it's got this pretty box, this fancy pretty box, right? And it's inside there's vacuum molded plastic holding those truffles in place, and the truffles have the fancy foil. The promise is that these things are probably good and cost a lot of money, right? I mean, that's the impression you get. I think that's their brand message. But if you cracked it open and ate one of those and it tasted like the poisoned Chinese toothpaste they were selling a couple years ago, or the milk they were poisoning their people with, you know, if you found out these came from China and had that in there, the brand promise is dead. And I think that's the problem with Toyota. It's not that they had a quality problem, because all manufacturers have an occasional quality problem. All auto manufacturers have had recalls, right? Anybody that owns a car, you've gotten a recall notice sometime or another, right? It's the way they handled it that they lost our trust. And trust is a key element of the equation of us. Who are we going to align with, right? And I think that's Toyota's biggest problem. Now, the media, social media, and mass media didn't help them any. Sort of blew it out of proportion, like Brad said at lunch. But I think the issue there is trust. So Toyota wasn't delivering on their brand promise because we all held Toyota up to be the best, right? They've got the best quality. And they fell down, so they lost our trust. It's going to take them a long time to recover. Okay, so why entrepreneurship? Why is it important? Well, it turns out the Kauffman Foundation, anybody heard of the Kauffman Foundation? They're renowned for work with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. They're probably one of the world's foremost authoritative bodies on entrepreneurship. And what they found, they did a study from 1980 to 2005, nearly all new net job creation came from young companies, companies less than 5 years old. And so if you listen to our politicians in Washington, they're just now starting to talk about small business, right? They bailed out big business. And I'm not saying that wasn't necessary. It was probably necessary. But I don't think it's sufficient to pull us out of this crisis, because they're not going to be creating the jobs like the new businesses are, the young businesses. And in 2007, census data showed that if you exclude startups, which would be from 0 to 1 year old, and just look at the 1 to 5 year old businesses, they were responsible for creating 8 million of the 12 million new jobs. So if we want to pull out of this economic crisis, we really got to work with the young businesses, right? The entrepreneurs, all right? And I showed you that formula earlier. I am an engineer. I describe myself as a recovering engineer. But the Engineers Union requires me in any presentation to show at least one formula and one chart. So here you go. Here's the graph. And what this shows is economic activity. This is gross domestic product per capita on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we have entrepreneurial activity, the rate of entry of new businesses. And we see a direct correlation between entrepreneurial activity and economic well-being. All right? So if we can be one of these data points out here as a nation, we'll create more jobs and we'll have a better standard of living. And it starts with small business. Pretty straightforward, okay? So, what do we think of when we think of it, entrepreneurs? Risk takers, do we think of that? What other words describe entrepreneurs? Innovative. We certainly will talk about that. Others? Independent. Okay, self-confident. All right, so self-centered, maybe swashbuckling a little bit, risk-taking, hanging out on the top of airplanes that are zooming by, right? Well, the data actually tells us something else. If you look into entrepreneurship and you talk to successful entrepreneurs, what you find is, in a nutshell, they are self-directed, diligent optimists. That's the shortest description I can give you. And there's actually a study that was done by Guardian Life, and they have this Guardian Life index of what matters most to entrepreneurs. And what they found was customers matter most. Employees are second. They worry about themselves third. So it's not self-centered, egotistical, I got the best thing in the world and I'm going to conquer the world. What gets them up in the morning and gets them rushing into work? Customers who appreciate what they do. Okay? Risk-taking. That was the other thing we talked about. There's risk and there's risk. And entrepreneurs tend to set realistic and achievable goals. When they do take risks, it's a calculated risk. Entrepreneurs won't generally take risk on something where they cannot affect the outcome. They put their energy in something they can make a difference. Okay? Does anybody speak French? I would butcher that word in French. I apologize to anybody that's French descended. I could say it in Spanish, entreprende, but I don't think that's how the French would say it. But that's where the word entrepreneur comes from. It means to undertake. This is one of those cases where a direct translation doesn't really work because that means entrepreneurs are undertakers. And I don't think that's true either. But entrepreneur is someone who willingly initiates, operates, and manages a business venture and is responsible for its success or failure. Another study done by Gallup said of all the professions, entrepreneurs tend to be the happiest of all the professions. Even with the burden of meeting payroll and starting a business and all of that, they tend to be the happiest. That's probably another whole session we can have. I think it comes down to being in charge of your own destiny, having control, and not being in an environment where somebody else is making decisions that can influence your livelihood or not. It's up to you as an entrepreneur. I think that's where that comes from. So if we look at the characteristics of entrepreneurs, they have a high level of drive and energy. They are optimistic and sometimes insanely competitive. Right? You have to wear many hats as an entrepreneur. Typically, an entrepreneur has some idea of the future state of their business, where they want to get to. They set high but realistic and achievable goals, service-minded and customer-oriented, as we just said. Enough self-confidence to take calculated risks, not wild risks. A readiness to learn from mistakes. The ability to get good people to come work for them innovative. We heard that over here. And clear measures of success. And what I'd like to do is break these down. All right? So number one was a high level of drive, energy, and optimistic, and intensely competitive. Entrepreneurs tend to be in the game, not in the stands. Right? Very active. Going to make something happen. All right? They tend to lead rather than preside. In large organizations, bureaucracies, you have presiders at the top. Not in entrepreneurial organizations. Obviously, and almost always passionate about what they do, holding themselves to high standards, and socially conscious now. And there are actually social entrepreneurs as well. You can be a nonprofit and be entrepreneurial. And by the way, you can be entrepreneurial within large organizations. You can be what's known as intrapreneurial. You just have to know what will fly in your organization and what won't. Some organizations tolerate more innovation along those lines and some don't. You can summarize these as lead by example with passion. That's sort of the summary of these characteristics. Entrepreneurs wear many hats. I can tell you from my own experience, it's not easy to manage all the things that you have to manage to get a business off the ground. What happens when you all have a problem with your computer at work? What do you do?
I threaten to kick it, and then I call IT.
Then you call IT, right? And you fill out a ticket, and they come down and they take your computer, and they come back, and it works, right? And you're back in line, and they close out the ticket. And if you're like me, you get a string of tickets, and they all had the same failure code on there. It was PEBCAC, PEBCCAK. And finally, I asked the IT manager one day, "What does PEBCAC mean?" And he said, "Problem exists between chair and keyboard." So, when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have an IT department. You don't have an HR department. You don't have a payroll department. You're it. And you got a problem. Who's going to do it? You're going to do it. And there was a study done last year that found that the majority of entrepreneurial failures were due to the inability to manage all these multiple priorities. There's just so much going on, and a typical startup doesn't have the resources to go hire specialists or hire people to do all this, and you run out of time or money, right? Entrepreneurs also have this long-term vision where they want to be, and they have the dual roles of running the business and changing the business, working on it and working in it. And the goal is to be working on the business and have other people working in the business. There's an old saying, if you're a carpenter or a good furniture maker and you're the best one in town and you decide, you know what, I'm going to go into business making furniture and selling it. You're no longer a furniture maker. You're a business person who sells furniture. And so you have to then work on the business instead of in the business in order for it to work. And we also know that the future is shaped by optimists. By default, pessimists aren't going to run the world because all they do is complain. They don't do anything about it. The people doing something about it are optimists. And so the future belongs to them. Entrepreneurs also tend to set the high goals. They set the direction, and they model the pace for their organization if they have an organization. There's a natural rhythm in organizations, and entrepreneurs, successful ones, can model that rhythm and make things happen. They also are wise when it comes to the use of resources because they don't have a lot of resources. You can't just throw money around. You don't have it. Okay? So you can summarize this as long-term vision. This is what we want to achieve with our business. We mentioned their number one goal is satisfied customers, right? Service-minded, customer-oriented. Market leadership in this new economy is going to belong to people who help other people. The sad news for anybody with a product of their own that worked hard and gave it birth and went into production and did all the prototyping and got it out to market is nobody cares about your product as much as you do. It's a sad but true fact. What they care about is what your product can do for them. Can you make my kid, help my kid get better test scores in school, right? Can you solve some other problem? Can you alleviate some other pain that I have in my life? That's what they care about. They don't care about the product, okay? If you can help them overcome their pain, if you can help them solve their problems, then they're going to align with you. They're going to come back. They're going to buy more, all right? That marketplace is going to be more about connections, less about transactions, where sincerity and authenticity are absolutely essential, and the transparency that we talked about. Again, it's the relationships that we build with people. It's going to make your business successful. All right? So, summarize that as help others and build relationships. Customer-oriented. Right? The self-confidence to take moderate risks. Entrepreneurs aren't, as we said, they aren't generally high-risk takers when they can't affect the outcome of the situation. Very focused on outcomes. And they don't see problems, they see opportunities. If you could see on those skiers coming down the slope, if you could see through their goggles at their eyes, they're not looking at the gate that they're going through right now. They're looking at one or two gates down the way. It's the only way they're going to make all those turns is if they're looking that far ahead. The same with race drivers. They look 2 turns ahead. It's the same with running backs coming through the line in football. They're not looking at these people that are about to tackle them. They're looking down the field for those openings. And that's the way we have to be in business. There's an old saying, obstacles are what you see when you take your eye off the goal. All right? Entrepreneurs tend to see these opportunities, and that's where businesses blossom, when there's a niche, where there's an unserved need. All right? And there also has to be a readiness to learn from your own mistakes. This is a characteristic of every single Baldrige winner I've ever had the opportunity to speak with, company-wise. They have a certain humbleness about them. I don't know if you all have noticed this. But they don't stand high and mighty after being recognized at the highest level in our nation. When you talk to them, they'll be very humble, and they'll ask you about your business because they know that they don't know everything. They couldn't possibly know everything. And that you might know something that they can benefit from. And it takes a certain humbleness to be able to admit that. But it's a sort of an active vulnerability, not passive victim vulnerability. There's a difference there. They want to learn. They want to get better. And it's the same with the Baldrige winners. There's a very strong correlation there. If you take Andy Zuckery's entrepreneurship class at East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, you'll hear him use this term, fail fast. And the concept isn't you want to fail. The concept is if we're going to fail, let's do it quickly and learn from it and move on. All right? So we have to be quick learners. And there's this great quote from Eric Hoover, in times of change, learners inherit the earth because the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with the world that no longer exists. So we have to have this mindset of keeping up. And the only way you can do that is through continuous learning. Right? So we manage by fact and we learn fast. That's the summary from those characteristics. The ability to get others to work for you, and that's building a great team. It also goes back, there's a lot of data that say you want happy customers, it starts with happy employees. And Sears actually did one of the very first studies of this. And they could tell you for an X% rise in employee satisfaction, they got an X% rise in profit. And it wasn't 1-to-1. It was a Y% rise in profits. And so they knew when a proposal came in that if it increased employee satisfaction, it was going to increase their profitability. And they could decide immediately whether they should fund that or not, how much it costs, because they knew how much they were going to get out of it on the back end. It's very important. So, you want happy customers? Start with happy employees. All right? And the future marketplace is going to be more about people than about products. It's the people that help us get what we need. All right? So, entrepreneurs tend to be people persons. They also tend to be innovative. All right? And what I've seen in a lot of small businesses, they have some version of PDCA. And part of that goes back to what we were talking about, being learners. But it's that plan, do, check, act. They may not know it. They may not call it PDCA. But if you ask them, how do you keep current? Well, first we have a plan, and then we go and do something, and then we monitor it to see how we're doing, and then if it's working, And they've just described PDCA for you, but they don't know it in those terms. It's very common to see that. And then in other organizations, as an examiner, for any examiners in here, you'll see PDCA, but every company has their own different acronym. It's the same thing over and over again. It might be 3 steps, it might be 5 steps. Have you seen it? Over and over again. It's universal, okay? And it helps drive innovation. Not just in products, though, in processes. Think about companies like Amazon or like Zappos. What are they selling? They're selling books and shoes. You can get books and shoes anywhere, right? You can go downtown and get books and shoes. You can order online from anybody. But why do we go to those places? Because their processes are so good. You order from Zappos 7 or 8 o'clock at night, those shoes are on your front step the next day. Holy cow, how'd they do that? And they sent you 5 different sizes, and you try on and figure out which one you want. You send the rest back for free. That's innovation in their processes. The product is the same for everybody. And consistent results. Remember, we talked about branding, delivering on the promise. Well, if everybody has the same promise in their mind of what that brand delivers, then the only way we can keep up to that promise is consistency. Think about McDonald's or Pal's if you're in East Tennessee. You know exactly what you're going to get at McDonald's, no matter what McDonald's you walk in, any McDonald's across the nation. It's consistency. And they're living up to their brand. Now, you may think it's a crappy brand. You may not like their burgers or their fries or whatever it is. But by golly, it's going to be the same, one to the other. They live up to their promise. And how do they do that? With systems, consistent systems. All right? So if we're going to live up to our promise, we got to have consistent systems. Plays right in with Baldrige and everything we're talking about here, right? And then there's this quote from Aristotle. You've probably all seen it. We are what we repeatedly do. The systems, the habits. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. So consistency and innovation are very important. And then the last one was clear measures of success. Successful entrepreneurs, we talked about earlier, wearing many hats. You've got a lot of stakeholders you've got to keep track of. Successful entrepreneurs balance that success for all stakeholders. There are numerous milestones along the way. We all know that this is a journey, right? Not a destination. And the focus really is on the outcomes. The income will follow. If you do everything else right, the income will follow. Focus on the outcomes, all right? So that is focused on outcomes. That's the summary there. So if we go back and we look at those, we had lead with passion, long-term vision, help others and build relationships, manage by fact and be fast learners, people persons, innovation and consistency, and focus on outcomes. 7 items. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Well, there's 7 habits. There's 7 parts of the criteria, right? What if I rearranged that and made it look like that? Does that look familiar? And that's the whole point of what I'm trying to say. I think entrepreneurs are following this criteria. They just don't know it. And so if you are an entrepreneur, or if you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, or you're trying to foster a little bit of entrepreneurship within your organization, here's your answer. That's right there in the criteria. It's all laid out for you. So that's the Baldrige model right there. It's exactly what it is. Took me 2 years to figure this out. You guys got it in 20 minutes. So let's bring this to a bruising conclusion here. There's a thread that I wanted to weave. All right? Success in this new market, in this new online connected world market, means being the brand of choice. That's what people are going to partner with. Being the brand of choice means consistently delivering on your promise. Living up to your brand. That consistent delivery comes from consistent systems, of which the criteria is the best known model today. And then I would add into all of that the point of, if we're going to come out of this global economy, then we need to help the entrepreneurs some way. Tax breaks are not going to get it because startups aren't making any money anyway, so they're not paying taxes. And there's got to be something else. I don't know what it is, but if you ever have a chance to talk to your elected representatives and have the notion that they might actually represent you a little bit, tell them to help the little guys. That's where it's at. All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and enjoy the banquet tonight.